Hey everyone, welcome to another video. Today I'm going to do more puzzle streak. I want to get up to 50 correct puzzles in a row. Before I begin, I just want to give a shout out to the Brontologist, who is my first subscriber to this channel. He has his own YouTube channel, as you can see, and it's pretty cool. He goes through and he's climbing up the rating ladder himself. He's got really cool editing on his videos. Very interesting to watch, entertaining, and yeah, really nice to have some engagement with my channel. So thanks a lot for that to you, the Brontologist, and I wish you all the best. And with that, I'm now going to share the puzzle streak screen, and we're going to continue on with the journey. So I had some technical difficulties just earlier, so I've already done the first 9 puzzles. I'm going to carry it on from here. Hopefully getting all the way up to 50. I've got a little bit less than an hour, and hopefully I'm going to devote this whole time purely to improving my chess. So without any further ado, let's get into this. This one, I think I actually already did this one. You can take the bishop, and when he recaptures, you have this typical 2 queens separated by a bishop idea, where the bishop can move away with a check, and the queen can then be captured. All right, so this is now a new puzzle for me. All right, so what I'm seeing straight away is we can take the knight with check, and that's generally advisable. And if he moves to defend with the queen, then of course we could take the rook with check. So he's not going to do that. Instead, what he might do is bring the bishop back. However, if he does that, we can then take this pawn, and that would seem quite okay. And the other option is that he could move the king. If he moves the king, then I guess we can just take this knight, and that would be relatively good for us as well, if not exceptionally good. If he were then to try and attack our queen, just to make sure we have spaces to go, we would then be able to give another check. And if he were to move, I'm sure, his king's coming out, it looks really dangerous. So I think that's going to be it. Rather than taking this, I think we take this first. Okay, we can, in this case, I said we were going to take the pawn, so I'll do that. Okay, and then his knight was still hanging. Here we have another puzzle. Again, we have an undefended piece here, and in taking this piece, we'll also be defending our own rook. So there is a decent temptation to do that. However, is it quicker to give a check here? He would take the pawn, then we take this rook. I mean, I guess it depends, doesn't it? So this is very forcing. He obviously can't just move away because, well, even if he did move away, we would get a queen. He would capture the queen. We would take the rook. He would take our rook. So if he does move away, we're just going to take the rook. In such a scenario, yes, we win a rook. Our rook is, it's not under attack, but it is sort of in this area of the board all on its own. Whereas we can just take a free bishop and everything looks pretty good. What would be his response if we take the bishop? I guess one thing that comes to mind is his ability to take this pawn. Although I don't believe we would worry too much about that, because we can then bring our queen up here and be threatening this pawn at least, which is more than just a threat against a pawn. If we come here, he moves, or maybe takes the pawn, and then we take the rook. Is there anything he can do to us with these 2 pieces? You see, I'm just kind of struggling to determine what's better. I just pick up a bishop or pick up a rook, and really the answer should be to pick up a rook. Most times that would be the answer. But is there something that I'm missing here? So let's have a careful look at this move. Check. He can't take. He can't come here. So he is forced not here, but either here or here. Okay. I would suspect it's best for him to take the pawn. Okay. Following that, I would suspect it's best for us to take his rook. And then perhaps it would be good for him to advance this pawn, which is an attack on the rook. But even in that scenario, we can capture the bishop. If he does in fact take this rook, well, then we could capture this pawn. And we've got an extra rook. So that really seems good. It really seems good always to capture an extra rook. On the other hand, if we take the bishop, his king could only move to this square. But he still has a rook. So what would he do after we take this? Can he then create a pass pawn of his own, attacking our queen? And yeah, coming up with some connected pass pawns all of a sudden with our king in the center, that's quite dangerously open. Now, where we would go from there, if we want to keep an eye on this rook, is that we would have to actually come either here or here. And that just seems slightly dangerous. I would suspect we would want to come here, so we're also keeping an eye on this pawn. But all of a sudden, these pawns get rolling really quickly. And so for that reason, I prefer this move. Take the rook, and then life is a bit easier. All right, so I'm glad we got that one. This one looks like it's going to be a check, forcing him here, and then a back rank checkmate. I think that's correct. I don't want to make any mistakes. Check is forcing him here. Check is forcing the capture, and that is a forced mate. Okay, very good. All right, so off we go. In this one, we are down material. Are we? No, material is equal. Material is equal. And it doesn't seem as though there's any immediate attack to the untrained eye, which is my eye. But we're trying to train this eye, so there probably is an attack somewhere. What do we want to do? I mean, first instincts are we want to develop some of these pieces. Maybe we want to sit our rook on an open file, try and get a check against the king, and the bishop would fall. So if we do something like that, is there anything he can do? I mean, I guess the obvious thing would be move the bishop away. Check nevertheless can arise. He can come and attack our rook. And that seems a bit, how are you going? So I think if we do this, we do nevertheless have a threat in mind here, which is nice. There's other ways for him to defend that threat. Like, for instance, he could just develop to this square. And I couldn't really take because he takes back. Likewise, he could develop his knight to that square. So I actually don't think this threat contains much of a threat. In other words, I think this is all bark, no bite. But what I am seeing is that his rook is immobilized at present. It can't go anywhere. And it's on a dark square. So perhaps we can use our dark squared bishop to annihilate that rook. And I believe there is no defense. Then we're going to be up a comfortable amount of material. And I don't see anything better than that. Okay, he blocks with the knight. That's fine. We're going to take that knight. He'll spare his rook, but we want a knight. All right, so moving on. Once again, we have the black pieces. And in this scenario, the king's fairly vulnerable, especially compared to this king, which still seems to have a lot of protection. So things seem a bit dangerous here. Certainly, the knight is pinned by his rook. So the knight can't really move. I'm just playing with some ideas here. If we take the rook and he recaptures, one thing that could happen is we get our rook up here. And then we have 2 rooks on the 7th rank, or the 2nd rank in this case, possibly able to give him some trouble. But one of the issues with that is that if we take the rook and we give him a queen, A, we've lost a lot of material. And B, if we come up here, it gives him an opportunity to bring his rook down here with check, forcing us here. So it's not mate. This is interesting. Very interesting. Had a little bit of a technical difficulty there. I'm not sure if anything there recorded at all. However, I'm just going to continue on. We're 14 moves into this puzzle streak, and I'm trying to determine what I should do here. Perhaps I should take the knight. I think if we take the knight, you know, we're coming in with some big threats there as well. So he probably has to take back. Now, once he takes back, we can recapture, at which point, okay, we've given up the queen, but we've given it up for a knight and a rook. And then we have 2 rooks and 2 minor pieces versus a queen and a rook. So the queen and the rook together are worth about 14. And 2 rooks and these 2 minor pieces together are worth about 16. He also does have a number of extra pawns. So materially, he would be ahead of us there. It's not all about material. It is also about what that material can do. And in this case, our material is immediately threatening to take this pawn and cause a whole lot of trouble there. So there is that, but it doesn't seem clear until I notice that his king and his queen are both on the same file, and I should say rank. And that one thing we can do is bring this rook up to b1, and the queen is going to be a goner. It probably has to give itself up. And even though our king does seem quite vulnerable, I think that in the end, he won't have the ability to actually mate us here at all. So I think that's going to be the answer. And in fact, it is. All right, very good. Now, I'd like to continue on, but I think I'm having some internet issues. So I'm going to stop this video here. And no, I'm going to keep this video going. All right, here we go. Straight away, I'm seeing this idea, attacking the bishop and also threatening mate. So if he wanted to stop mate, he would have to take the pawn. We can then recapture, re-establishing the mate threat. I don't believe there's any way for him to deal with that. So unless I'm really missing something, this is the old lobster pincer checkmate. And there's really nothing that he can do about that. All right, so what are we going to do here? There is a check available. And in that case, we've taken away all of these squares from the king. Now, he could block the check, which also reminds me that there is also this check available. And this check is actually better because A, it can't be blocked. B, we take away all of these squares. And that therefore forces him here. And once he's been forced there, then this check becomes even better because the king can't go anywhere. And the fact that he can block with his rook is only a temporary defense. Once we take the rook, it'll actually be mate. So it's going to be check, check, checkmate. Okay, so here I can see that we've got a check. And if he takes the rook, the point is we can then take the queen. The only other option is that he moves his king away. And if he does that, we can provide another check, I suppose. Or what am I missing here? If we give that check, I guess he can just block. If we take the rook, he would take our queen. If we take the queen, he takes our rook. I guess then our rook can drop back and we're going to win some pawns over here. But at the same time, he would win a pawn. Do we start with check he moves the king, and then we just take the pawn, defending the rook and threatening this check. Or do we give the check? He runs here, and instead of giving a check over here, why not give the check here? That way, if he wants to defend with a pawn, which is actually the only option, then we can take this pawn with check, and that'll in fact be mate. So we can do this. He probably should take and give up his queen for the rook, which is what he does. So we take the queen. Very good. We're 18 moves into the streak. Things are going well. Now, looking at obvious moves first, we could take that. If he wants to recapture, do we have a follow-up? No, we don't in that circumstance, but I am seeing that maybe we should give a check here first. Because once we give a check and he either blocks or moves away, then we're going to have a queen attacking the knight, and we're also going to have a bishop attacking the knight, which means that after the check, we'll be able to capture the knight. And that would seem to me like a very good idea. All right, here we are white. We have the ability to take a queen he can recapture, but we also have the ability to give a check. And yes, he can capture, but we would be able to recapture. So let's have a look. Is there anything he can do other than capture? Well, there's no way for him to block the check. So if he wants to do something other than capture, it would have to be move the king. And that king has only 2 squares it can move to. I think this one would not be so dangerous from our perspective, the white perspective, because if he comes there, we have discoveries like, for instance, check. And then, after he moves, well, put it this way, I'm not afraid of that. I mean, if there's nothing else, then after this, we would have check and win the queen at the very least. So check, I think he's likely to come here, but then that gives way to check. If he then comes here, we have this check to win the queen. So I think this is a really good move. And if he takes, then we give check. All of a sudden, this is not possible at all because that would be mate, and same story over here. So I think this is just forced fantastic stuff for white. So if he moves over here, we're going to give a check. He moves over here. Now I'm going to come back here and take the queen. And the reason I'm able to do that is because when I come here, I'm unlocking a check against his king. He takes bishop. I think we're going to take queen. He cannot even recapture the rook because we would take his rook, and also his other rook was hanging as well. Okay, but here we have a new puzzle. A new puzzle, 20 moves in. Looking at some obvious moves first, what happens if we take the rook? He would almost certainly recapture. And then we have a little bishop double attack. And the only way for him to defend is to bring the knight back to defend the rook. The rook has no way to defend the knight. And then we take the rook, he takes a bishop, meaning that we've won an exchange. And I think that's going to be pretty good. All right, so here we have this ability because the pawn supports the bishop. And because of that, he's going to be forced back. And instead of just taking the rook, though that may be good, we're probably best off in that circumstance, finishing him off with checkmate. All right, so here we have another circumstance to look at. And the first thing that comes to my mind is I'd like to bring the queen here and threaten checkmate. One thing to consider, though, is the moment we move the queen away, he's going to be able to take our bishop with check. Okay, so if he takes the bishop with check, we're going to have to move our king somewhere. He then has the ability to provide another check, and we have to move the king somewhere else, at which point he can provide another check or another check. And we may end up here and somewhat unable to provide a checkmate up here. We would still, however, be threatening to give a check here. And if he moves to this square, which is the only square, we could give another check. And then if he moves well, he would actually have nowhere to go. So we would still be threatening mate. And I believe that's going to work. So if we come here, threatening mate in a variety of different ways, he takes the bishop, we come here. If he comes in here with a check, we can come here. And then if he gives another check, we can come here. He can then give this check. We can block that, however. And even if he took with the rook, we can take back. In fact, we wouldn't have to take back because we have the forced mate sequence right here. So I believe that's going to be the move. The only last thing to check is what happens if we come here, here, and then he checks with the rook first. But I think in that circumstance, we come here and he's already running out of checks. There's no further checks he can offer. So I think that's going to be the move. And I'm incorrect. I'm incorrect. So it's going to be very interesting now to see why I was wrong. Let's try without the computer to figure out what is the refutation to this move. Is it in fact this check? Okay, I thought I could come here. And then even though he can come here with another check, we can come here. And even though he can then come here with a check, I can come here. And even though he's got another check over here, I thought I can just block that. The issue is this queen could then take this pawn, which again would be a check. And if I have to move out of the way, he can then take the rook with check and in fact mate. So this is a good example of it's something that definitely happens in my games, where I will have a really good position and I'll have strong attacking chances, but it's not necessarily an easy calculation to figure out how to win it. And one wrong step is all it takes. This is the whole reason I'm doing this tactical training, these puzzles, because I want to gain the ability to be very consistent with my calculations and their accuracy. If I can do 50 accurate calculations in a row, my chess is going to get a lot better. Whereas if I'm doing 35 in a row or 22 in a row, and then I get one wrong, well, that can be the difference between winning a game and losing a game on the spot, as it would have been the case here. Because if I come here, just to show what I believe the refutation is, check, 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 check. And then if I block, which is somewhat the only move, then there's this check. And regardless of where my king goes, I guess I could block with my rook, couldn't I? But the problem is then this check returns. Okay, and once again, we're going to end up getting mated. If I tried to move out of the way here, it's the same sort of a story. So that's the refutation. Now, the actual answer, therefore, rather than coming here, the answer, and this, there should have been a tip off to this. And the tip off to this was when I realized that after these moves, I'd calculated this far, and I thought that this was all I needed to calculate, because I said that after rook takes rook, pawn takes, and life is all good. I didn't consider this check at all. I just knew that he couldn't take the pawn. And even though my rook wasn't there anymore, that's when I then learned that the queen, in conjunction with this pawn, was going to be enough to get the checkmate, and that the rook was actually superfluous detail, not needed. And it's based on that. That should have been the tip off to me to know that, hey, this rook is not needed. Maybe it can be used to enter the sacrifice, to enter the sequence through a sacrifice in a forceful manner. So check would actually force the king to capture. Then we can come here with check so that he doesn't have time to recapture the bishop. Oh, what's happened? So let's play it out. So check, he takes. Check, he goes back. And then we have the checkmate sequence from before, where we give this check, and then that would be mate. He never has an opportunity to take this, which, by the way, itself leads to me being checkmated by force. So there you go. Slightly disappointing in the sense that I didn't make it to the goal of 50 accurately solved puzzles in a row. Didn't even make it halfway this time. I only made it to 22. I thought I was there, but No, I missed a detail. I missed a detail. I saw this. I saw this. I saw this. I saw this. And I saw this. But I missed that. That's what I missed in my visualization. So not too bad. You can probably hear the ice cream truck outside. Perhaps you can't, but either way. Had I seen that, and I knew that this wasn't the answer, the question is, would I have actually come up with this idea of sacrificing the rook? Well, clearly I didn't. And clearly that's now something to keep in my mind. You know, the idea of when I realized that the queen could do it without the rook, that sort of introduced to me the idea of a superfluous piece, and maybe using a superfluous piece to force the entry into a favorable sequence. That's something I can take from this. Maybe something you can take from this as well into your games. So with that, I'm going to leave this video here. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you again in the next video. Cheers.